it's Jessie from b.a.r.e Flower Farm. It's already mid-March, and if you're like me, you're already seeing tulips peeking out in the field. So whether or not those are just small shoots or full-blown leaves, sometimes even with the bloom head starting to form, we are getting tulips in the next month to month and a half. So I thought today would be a great time for me to do a recap on some of the tulips learnings that I've had over the past couple of months. There are three things that I want to talk about. One, I want to talk about what happens if you're getting short stems. Two, how to dry store tulips in case if you need to hold them out for at least a week or two or even three. And the third thing I want to talk about is, of course, pricing. So if you're new to my channel, I am a second-year cut flower farmer. I am located in New Jersey in zone 6B. And believe it or not, I would say that I've grown more tulips than any other flower variety that I have had in the past year. In fact, I am just entering into the full anniversary of that 1 year. We bought this property and closed on it about a year ago from today. And I hadn't even worked the land until I would say late April. So a lot of my tulip experience actually comes from winter forcing tulips. I took something called the Tulip Workshop last winter, and I basically learned how to hydroponically force tulips in my basement. And I forced over 1,000 stems at this point, and that has been really good practice in terms of helping me know when to harvest, doing some experimentation on just dry storing those bulbs, and even pricing. So I think a lot of those are very relevant to our discussion today. So let's get started. Short stems. So let's start off by saying that if you're seeing small blooms starting to peek through the ground at the soil level, don't panic, don't freak out. There's still plenty of opportunity for that tulip to grow sufficient stem length for you to use in a bouquet. Now, that being said, there are definitely photos online on Facebook where you can clearly see that the bloom head is relatively mature. There's color. It looks like it's going to blow open basically in about a day. This is where what I'm going to talk about is more relevant for you. So one thing that you can do that is instantaneous is if you harvest the entire tulip with the bulb on, you can usually gain at least another inch, if not close to 2 inches. So the stem of a tulip extends to the bottom of the bulb, and all you need to do is take a scissor, a knife, whatever it is, split that bulb in half, and then release that stem that has been encased in that bulb, and you'll automatically get another inch or two. Now, the second thing you can do is upon doing that, then take a bunch of tulips, wrap them in craft paper so that they are securely straight, and put them into a bucket of cold water and place that bucket into a dark and cold area for at least 1 to 2 nights. So what happens is this is going to promote stem elongation, similar to the way that when stems are in a vase like this and it goes to a customer's house, the stems are going to continue growing. In fact, I've had to trim these a couple of times, and this one has grown really, really tall. But the point here is that tulips will continue growing in water. And the reason why you want to keep it in a dark and cool area is to make sure that the bloom heads don't blow open too quickly so that they can actually unfurl in your customer's vase. Now, I would say that between splitting the bulb as well as putting it into a dark, cool area in a bucket of water, I've been able to get 3 to 5 inches of additional stem length. And all of this to say, sometimes your customers actually aren't going to care about short stems. So I had a bunch of short stems come up for Valentine's Day, and it was due to a lack of, I'll call it understanding of how much cooling time these bulbs got. So a bit about stems, or a bit about 101 with tulip bulbs and why they may not get their full stem length. And it's because of cooling. So tulips need a certain amount of cooling. It's usually at least 12, if not more, 15 weeks plus of cooling for them to achieve that desired stem length. And I would say for a lot of the US, we've had a relatively mild winter. So some of those tulips may not have achieved the normal amount of cooling that you would have gotten in a normal winter. And that's why they're getting these shorter stem lengths. So for me, I was hydroponically forcing. I think that some of these tulips really just got maybe like 6 to 8 weeks of cooling. They came up really, really short. What I did was I put them into a mason jar, a pint-sized mason jar, and you can see I have different levels of height here, which created a bit of depth and just, interest in the jar. I put anywhere from 9 to 10 into these jars, and I sold these jars for $20. Of course, there's a ribbon on it, there's a card on it, but they flew off for Valentine's Day, right? All that to say, not all hope is lost if you have short stems. There's obviously creative ways to package and market your stems. I've seen people sell, little posy bundles and say that, hey, the stem length is going to be a little bit short right now, but they will grow in the vase. And obviously with the other two techniques that I talked about, you can really gain an extra few inches of stem length. So that is short stems. Now let's talk about storing your tulips. So if you're looking to store your tulips or you're looking to gain a couple of days, up to 5 days, I would say it's totally fine to snip off those bulbs, wrap in craft paper, put into that bucket of water, put into a dark and cold spot as if you were looking to elongate those stems. But if you're going beyond that 5 to 6 days, I would say, if possible, try to harvest with the bulb on. And the reason is that when you harvest a tulip, even with the bulb on or bulb off, the tulip is technically going to start deteriorating. The cell structures are going to start breaking down. But the rate at which the cell structures are breaking down when the bulb is on is much slower, because that bulb is still able to provide some level of sugar through the carbohydrates in the bulb, as well as moisture. So there's a huge difference when you're pulling dried stored stems with bulb on versus bulb off out of the refrigerator after especially 2 weeks. One is very, very limp and the other one isn't. Now, that being said, I have actually dried stored tulips without the bulb for over 2 weeks. Here is actually a video showing how it is getting rehydrated. It is very, very limp when it first comes out, but then this is over about, I would say, a 2-hour period. It's a time lapse, and you can see that they're perking right back up. However, it is never going to be able to rehydrate back to the full 100% because some of the cells have started deteriorating. And the good news is that within the 2-week storage time frame, I found that there is minimal impact on vase life. It is dependent on variety, but for this variety, I got close to, I think it was 9 days out of those flowers, which is pretty good. Now, nothing is going to beat you harvesting day of, getting those stems out to the customer immediately, and that is going to provide the ultimate vase life. But for a lot of us, it is really not practical for us to move every single stem out immediately. There are situations where we need to hold these stems for an event. There are situations where varieties are just not all coming in at the same time, and you want to make sure you have enough for a bouquet. So this is really practical if you need to extend the storage of your tulips to meet those requirements. Now, I would say that I'm very comfortable now storing my tulips for up to 2 weeks. When it comes to 3 weeks, I start getting a little bit nervous. There's a difference when I'm trying to hold stems for a one-day event versus I'm trying to hold stems for, let's say, a florist or for someone who wants to pick up a bouquet and is looking for maximum vase life. So something also for you to consider here, especially if you have a cooler or if you don't have a cooler. There's a huge difference in storing tulips in a cool environment. So, hypothetically, the study showed that tulips can take down to 31 degrees during dry storage. That being said, some coolers and refrigerators are not always constant in maintaining that temperature. So I always like to crank it up a few more degrees just to make sure that those tulips don't get frost burned or cool burned. So I try to keep it at 38 degrees if it's in my fridge, but there was a time where my fridge was occupied by storing bulbs. So I would keep them in my garage, which would fluctuate anywhere between, I would say, the mid 30s all the way up to 50 degrees. And even storing them in 45 degrees to 50 degrees was actually more than okay if I needed to hold those bulbs for 5 days. So there are a variety of ways for you to store your bulbs or to store your tulip stems. You just need to make sure that you have a cool environment to do so. The other thing to consider is the level of humidity. So when you grow tulips in too high of a humidity, you risk something called stem topple, and that is where the stem literally topples. If you dry store for too long in a humid area, the same thing actually happens too. The problem is that it actually doesn't necessarily manifest when you are rehydrating your tulips. It manifests when it's in the vase for a couple of days, and then you'll start seeing the tulip head just droop down. So that is in some ways worse because you won't know since it's already in a customer's house. So try to keep that humidity lower. I would say, try not to go above 65% if possible. So a couple of options, right, in terms of takeaway for you to dry store tulips. Anything under 5 days, snip the bulb off, make sure that you are keeping it in a cool area. I would even go as far to wet a paper towel and put that around the bottom of the stems, rubber band it, maybe with something like a doggy poop bag so that it retains moisture while it is being stored. Now, I actually have a much more in-depth video on my experiences with dry storing tulips, and it is mostly around bulb off. So I will put it in the description below as well as link it up here if you are interested. But that brings us into our third and final topic, which is pricing. I'm going to start off by saying that you are not competing with your local grocery store. I frequently see online people lamenting on how cheap the tulips are at their local grocery store. Your tulips are superior to these tulips, and in my view, they are not in the same category whatsoever. First of all, your tulips are locally grown. There are less people handling these stems. They are probably also going from the ground to the store or to your customers' hands much more quickly than some of these harvested tulips that are being grown in the Netherlands or in Canada or wherever it may be. The second thing is the size. We typically are growing tulips that are 11 to 12 centimeters in bulb size. That makes a huge difference because a lot of these mass growers are growing tiny, tiny tulips. And when you harvest the tulips, you'll often notice a difference in the bloom head size. But even if you don't, if you allow them to sit in a vase over time, they will start to really grow big, at least the ones that we grow versus the ones that you see from the grocery store. I mean, I'm just taking out one of my Columbus stems. How often do you see a tulip this size at the grocery store? You really don't. So that's the other thing. A lot of us are growing specialty types of varieties. I grow fringes, parrots, doubles, in addition to the singles, stuff you're not going to see at the grocery store. So to me, this is the difference between selling a gas station type of coffee versus Starbucks versus something that I've referenced before, third wave coffee, where you're paying upwards of $6, $7 for a coffee, right? They're all coffee, but they're attracting different types of customers at different price points based on the quality that that customer is looking for. So when it comes to pricing your stems, what I think is the easiest thing to do is roll it back to the costs. How much did you pay per bulb? And I would say that for, most of us, we're probably paying on average somewhere between like 40 to 45 cents a bulb, even if it's wholesale, including shipping. I've seen people on clearance get it down to as low as 10 cents if they're waiting until like December, January. Again, you are gambling potentially with cooling time and stem length, but I've also seen people not buy wholesale and pay close to $1 a bulb. So go back and think about how much did you pay per bulb and how much do you need to make a profit. So for me, my absolute lowest is actually $1.50 a stem that I am willing to sell a tulip for. So let's just say on average, I'm getting these bulbs for 45 cents, tack on another 5 cents for losing like 20% of my bulbs, as well as some other stuff. Then I tack on labor. I'm realistically making about 50 cents to 60 cents per stem. So if I'm selling it in a bunch of 10, one bouquet, I'm making $5 a profit. It's not great profit at the end of the day compared to something like a sunflower where the seed is really, really cheap, or something like zinnias where it's cut and come again. But at the end of the day, it is a flower that is in the spring, meaning that there are a few other flowers at this time of year, and people love spring flowers. In fact, a lot of people have more successful springs than summers when they're selling flowers. So, you can look at it either as a loss lead or try to make a little bit of money off of it. But the number one thing is do not underprice your local tulips compared to the grocery store because they're just two completely different products. Now, one thing to note is that the pricing for field tulips, in my view, is very different than the winter forest tulips that I have. So my winter forest tulips are commanding around, I would say, $2 to $2.50 a stem. That's because no one else has tulips at this time, and it is a more labor-intensive process. There are more inputs in the sense that I do have to put on grow lights. So all this stuff gets factored in. But during field tulips, a lot of other flower farmers have tulips, so you are realistically competing against more supply in the market to meet the demand. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful for you. Drop me comments below if you have any questions. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button along with the bell next to the subscribe button. And I will see you next time.